Is climate change, caring for our planetary home. And we'll hope to be discussing the faith and philosophical foundations for the imperative to act in order to become committed stewards of the Earth's resources. I'm going to very briefly introduce each of the panelists so that you know who you'll be hearing from tonight. Our first speaker tonight will be Dr. Candace Kant, who represents the pagan perspective. Secondly, we'll hear from Elder Larian Markulius, representing the Alaskan indigenous perspective. Our third speaker will be Rabbi Arthur Wasko, representing Judaism. And our fourth speaker this evening will be the very Reverend Robert Stokig, representing Catholicism. Our final speaker is Jason Bracken, who is representing the atheist or secular humanist perspective. The purpose of our forums are basically threefold. First of all, to hear the actual teachings of each of the faiths or philosophies that are represented, rather than hearsay that we may have picked up along the way. It's also an opportunity to come to get to know people of different faiths and to visit different houses of worship, which are the two things we are unable to do tonight, unfortunately, because of COVID. So in order to get a little bit acquainted, what we're going to do is take a poll to see who's here. So we're going to put up a list of different religious groupings, and because we only have space for 10 in this application, we've divided them in a way that I hope you'll find okay. If you find yourself on this list, please press the button that applies to you, and then we'll find out who's here in just a moment. We have the ancient perspectives, which relate to the indigenous, people of the world, to the pagans, and to Roma. Atheists, humanists, or spiritual, not religious. Our next grouping has to do with the Baha'i faith, or the followers of Baha'u'llah, the Buddhist faith, the followers of the Buddha, the Christian or Christ-centered faiths that relate, they would be Catholicism, Orthodox, Protestants, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And then we also have Krishna or Hinduism, followers of Krishna, Islam, followers of Muhammad, Judaism, followers of Abraham and Moses, the Sikh tradition, followers of Guru Nanak, and then others, which would be multi-faith, Family Federation for World Peace, Religious Science, Christian Science, Scientology, Spiritualists, Unitarian Universalism, and the Arancha book, and others. So if you'll submit, then we'll find out who's here in just a moment. I want to share with you what these forums, oh my goodness, I've lost my place. How can that possibly be? The format, this is what I just really need to tell you, is the format is such that our panelists will each have 5 minutes in which, or no, 7 minutes in which to share with you their points of view. Ordinarily, we give them a heads up with the egg timer. We found that does not work, so I'm going to introduce or interrupt them at 6 minutes, and then they'll know they have a minute to follow up and finish their comments. Then we'll have a question and answer period, which if you will like to ask a question in the Q&A, then those questions will be sent to me. And that pretty much is what we will be planning to do tonight. How about this time we take a look at the poll? All righty, 10% we have ancient, indigenous, pagan, or Roma. Atheists, spiritualists, not religious are 2%. Baha'is, we have 12%. Buddhists, 2%. Church of Jesus all the Christian-related or Christ-centered are 40%, Islam 6%, Judaism 13%, and Sikh 2%. And then other 21%. Oh my goodness. So we have a very diverse group this evening. And at this moment, I would like to introduce our first panelist after we ask that we feel the spirit of the one who created us all as we share with one another what we believe about climate change. And our first panelist tonight will be Dr. Candace Kant. Dr. Kant is an emeritus professor of history at the College of Southern Nevada. She is the author of Heart of the Sun, an anthology in exaltation of Sekhmet, and Stepping into Ourselves, an anthology of writings on priestesses. Dr. Kant is academic dean at Cherry Hill Seminary, and she is a board member of the Interfaith Council of Southern Nevada. Dr. Kant.
Thank you. Paganism is an ancient human expression of spirituality, at least 30,000 years old and probably much older. When humans became self-aware, the sacred spoke to them in the earth, moon, sun, stars, and other creatures. Humans were not separate from nature. The word pagan comes from Latin and refers to the countryside. After Christianity was made the state religion of the Roman Empire, Roman armies took Christianity northward into Europe. Christianity was the religion of the cities, the urbanus, and when the Roman armies encountered the rural people of Europe who followed beliefs rooted in the land, celebrating the earth, the seasons, and life, the soldiers called them paganus, or people of the place. But a more accurate translation might be country bumpkin or country hick. Contemporary paganism is not a monolithic movement, but a tapestry, blending innumerable traditions from many eras and areas, encompassing many threads and patterns. It does not have dogma, scriptures, rules, authorities, a single founder, or a single religious philosophy. Our scripture is the wind and the rain, the earth and the sun, the moon and the stars, the planets and the galaxies. Our text is nature, the teeming life and wind and water of our planet's biosphere, the nuclear processes that energize our sun, and the swirling push and pull of gravity that spins the galaxies into being. Paganism teaches that the sacred is within us and around us, and that interaction with our physical world puts us in contact with the sacred. A pagan community statement on the environment has been translated into 16 languages and signed by people from over 103 countries. It states that paganism recognizes that humanity is neither above nor separate from nature. The biosphere may be understood as a single ecosystem, and all life on Earth is interconnected. The very atoms of which we are composed connect us to the entire universe. We do not live on Earth like some alien visitor. We are part of Earth. We are Earth, with carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus making up our bodies. We are air, giving food to the trees and grasses when we exhale, and breathing in the gift of free oxygen with each breath. We are fire, burning the energy of the sun, captured and given to us by plants. And we are water, with the oceans flowing in our veins. The same water that nourished the dinosaurs is within our cells. We are connected to all, and we feel these connections in a spiritual way. The web of life includes strands that tug on our heart, thread through our essential nature, and weave us into a spiritual whole. Many human activities destroy parts of us, and we recoil at them. We care about our waters, our land, our air, our fellow creatures, our biosphere. Anything that harms the body of life on Earth is a spiritual and moral issue. Humanity's actions are altering the web of life, threatening many species, including Homo sapiens. Habitat loss continues as consumption increases. Deforestation destroys 150,000 square kilometers each year. Global warming caused by greenhouse gases has already contributed to sea level rise, ocean acidification, floods, forest fires, depletion of resources, erratic weather patterns, and drought. What can we do? Since Earth is able to heal herself, we need to stop doing harm and let the healing begin. Technical solutions will not move forward without political will, and the necessary political will requires a shift in our most deeply held values, in our very definition of what it means to be human, in how humanity relates to the world. This is a spiritual imperative. We must build true sustainability, transforming systems of domination and exploitation into symbiotic partnerships. This means promoting sustainable local economies, reforming our food systems, distributing resources in a just and humane fashion, and ensuring that our human population is below the carrying capacity of our planet through access to voluntary birth control and equal access to education and work for women. Economic and political systems that exploit the earth must be dismantled or reformed, including any system based on endless growth. This means moving away from disposable culture and towards renewable development with products intended for longevity, repairability, recycling, or composting. No more planned obsolescence. A change in spirit is required that will build a new relationship between humanity, other species, and the earth. Paganism has much to offer because two things are central to its philosophy: intelligent and intuitive harmony with Earth herself,
6 minutes,
full respect and feedback between the many different cultures and species which inhabit her. Ancient people saw nature as divine and acted accordingly. Daily existence was tied directly to the well-being of the earth. Today, that understanding of the connection with the earth has been lost. Paganism teaches a way of reconnecting to the earth and to nature. We celebrate the earth, opening ourselves to the power of a rainstorm and the warmth of the sun, dancing to the pulse of the earth and rejoicing at the changing seasons. Celebrating the earth means understanding that we are the earth's children and taking an active role in aligning spiritual health with caring for the earth. Pagans can help create a future in which humanity lives in harmony with the planet. We strive in our spirituality, work, play, and daily lives to connect to this harmony. This is what defines us. Pagans can share a spirituality which fosters bonds between ourselves and the rest of the web of life, instilling a sense of responsibility for how we interact with the ecosystem. Blessed be.
Thank you, Dr. Kant. Okay, so we're going to ask our dear friend Will to post our first poll questions. And we hope that you'll participate. So, do you feel a moral responsibility for the earth and its resources? Yes, no, somewhat. Does your faith or philosophy specifically state that taking care of the planet and its resources is a moral responsibility? And do you think that God, the divine or the ultimate reality, charges humanity to take care of the earth? Yes, no, or not sure. So if you answer it, then please hit submit. And we'll be back after our next speaker to tell you the results. Our next speaker, representing an Indigenous perspective, we are very pleased to welcome Elder Larry Merkulieff, who comes to us all the way from Alaska. He was the facilitator at the Global Summit of Indigenous Peoples on Climate Change, Indigenous Knowledge Session. He is the former chair of the Scientific Committee of Snow Change, a consortium of Indigenous peoples from 8 Arctic countries. He is the author of Wisdom Keeper, One Man's Journey to Honor the Untold Story of the Unangan People, and of Perspectives on Indigenous Issues, Essays on Science, Spirituality, and the Power of Words. We're very happy to welcome Elder Merkuliev tonight.
Angwan, ang kinga kekam na, ang kinga kasu na, tingu nangan way, nangan aksufta kuyak, ting kawalangan nangan way. I said, hello, my other self, which is the way we greet each other every day amongst my people who are Unangan. We call ourselves Unangan rather than Aleut, which is a name given to us by our former oppressors. And it means the real people by the sea. And I said that my traditional name is Kuyach, which is a traditional name given to one person each lifetime amongst all of my people. And it was given to me by the last Kuyach that was left alive at the time when I was 4 years old. And it means an arm extending out from the body, carrier of ancient knowledge into modern times, a messenger. And today I'm living the legacy of my name. And we're Kawalangan Unangan, which is the people of the stellar sea line. We have a close and intimate relationship with stellar sea lines. And our people have been out in the Bering Sea for over 10,000 years, and we're still there, which is something that many indigenous people can't say. And we also have stories about us migrating from Egypt to Outer Mongolia, to Kamchatka, to cross by skin boat, traditional skin boat in the Bering Sea. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I welcome all of you viewers to this. I hope that what I say may be of value to you. I work with traditional elders from all over the world, and we have an organization called Wisdom Weavers of the World. I head up this organization that keeps this effort going, called GSIL, which is Global Center for Indigenous Leadership and Lifeways. And you can find it at www.gcill.world. And through that, we have elders from all over the world that we called together in Kauai in 2017 to answer two questions. What is the state of the world as they see it now? And what must we be doing now? And as a result of that, we have a team of volunteers who have come together to create this entity called Wisdom Weavers of the World to deliver the messages of the elders to the world. And you can find the website in GSIL, www.wisdomweavers.world. Anyway, the elders charged us to get the messages of the elders to the world because they feel that there is a pressing need now. Mother Earth has survived for billions of years. She's going to survive for billions more. It's a question about whether or not we human beings are going to survive. And they say, the elders say, it's going to be determined by people in this lifetime alive on Mother Earth now. And that what we must do is change our consciousness from the mind to the heart. We live in a society where all the supposed intelligence of the human being is only in the mind. But indigenous people know that the intelligence, the God-given intelligence we all have, is embedded in our entire body. And we have disconnected from that by first disconnecting from our hearts. And from then on, it's easy to disconnect from anybody else and to disconnect from Mother Earth. And so it's a thing about disconnection. And so what happened then is that we concentrated our thinking in our brain, and the brain tells the heart what to do. Traditionally, the heart used to tell the brain what to do, and the brain's job is to figure out how to implement what your heart is telling you. And we've got very little time to do this. Business as usual is not going to work. And that we must begin to, the elders say the most unselfish thing that you can do is to heal yourself right now. And the ones who are going to negotiate this time of great changes on Mother Earth are people of the fire, which are people of the heart. And that using logic and rationality alone is not going to do it, that we are focusing in the wrong direction if we are doing that. We need to focus on coming to our hearts and listening to what our hearts have to tell us, because we understand as Indigenous people that our hearts are in direct communication with the divine, and that the only reason or the only thing that we can do is to tap into that source within ourselves that is in touch with the divine to know what we must do. Otherwise, I mean, even Einstein said we can't solve the problem with the same consciousness that created the problem. And all the solutions that are being brought to bear now are created by human beings with the same consciousness that always existed for thousands of years. And we prayed for end of wars, end of political corruption, end of the violation of women, et cetera, but it still continues. We prayed for end of wars for thousands of years, and yet it still continues, and life is—
6 minutes.
And so we need to re-examine what we have wrought. And we must understand that we need every single person. It's like I said, Angwan, hello, my other self. You are my other self. And we need our other selves to bring out the gifts that are in our hearts. They're unique to you. And the only way that you can share it with the world is if you talk with it. That's it.
Thank you very much, Elder Merkulif. That was lovely. You can probably hear the dinger now. Let's hear the results of our first poll. Do you feel a moral responsibility for the earth and its resources? 95% of us said yes. 5% said somewhat. Does your faith or philosophy specifically state that taking care of the planet and its resources is a moral responsibility? 84% said yes, 2% said no, and 15% say not sure. And do you think God, the divine or the ultimate reality, charges humanity to take care of the earth? 89% said yes, 2 said no, 11% said not sure. So that's very encouraging in terms of those who feel as though their relationship with God is encouraging them to take care of the planet. Our next presenter, representing Judaism this evening, and coming to us from the Eastern time zone, we are very fortunate to have Rabbi Arthur Waskow on our panel. Rabbi Waskow is the founder and director of the Shalom Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which he founded in 1983. Rabbi Waskow pioneered in the creation of Eco-Judaism, which includes its theology, prayer, daily practices, and activism for policy change. He is the author of 27 books, including his most recent book, Dancing in God's Earthquake, The Coming Transformation of Religion, which was just released in October by Orbis Books. So glad to have you tonight with us, Rabbi Waskow.
Shalom and salam and paz, peace and namaste. And if I hadn't been muted, I would have said amen to the two previous speakers. I want to affirm what both of them said about where we are and what we need to be doing. There's been a deep truth in the original understanding of Judaism, of biblical Judaism especially, of the close relationship between the human species and earth. The two words in Hebrew for human are Adam, and for earth, Adamah. And the closeness of those two words, the intertwining of the words, are really truthful about the reality behind the words. Environment in English always drives me a little crazy because environment means it's out there somewhere in the environs, whereas Adam, Adamah says that we're intertwined, and that's the real truth. There are several aspects of biblical Judaism which have come down to us in rabbinic Judaism of the last 2,000 years in somewhat weakened form. And the reason for the weakening is that the Roman Empire did to biblical Judaism what modernity has done to all our traditions, weakened our relationship with the earth. Jews were driven out of the ancient land that they were so deeply connected with, and then were often driven out of any land. So they were unable to make emotional and certainly political relationships with the lands where they lived. In the United States, where Jews have felt not fearful of being driven out of the land, has arisen eco-Judaism, a Judaism of the first time in about 2,000 years that has taken seriously what the biblical tradition taught about connection with the earth. So there are three aspects I want to spend some time exploring. The first is one of the crucial, indeed the most crucial, name of God, which in the Western alphabet is YHWH with no vowels. So it was never Yahweh, it was never Yahovah, because there were no vowels. And it got substituted, unfortunately, in the rabbinic tradition with the word for Lord, Adonai, and then that got transferred to Christianity and Islam, not so much Islam actually, but so that we learned its name as Lord and King, Melech, King. But when I disobey my grandmother, who said I was supposed to, when I saw that YHWH, I was supposed to say Adonai. And when I said to her, but their letters for the D sound and the N sound aren't there. Doesn't make sense. She says, I know, just do it. And I did it for many, many, many years. And then one day, for the story's too long to tell, I said, what would happen if I tried to pronounce it the way it's written, without vowels, just YHWH? And I'll try to make clear what came out. Just a breath. And I thought, now that makes sense. One of the real names of the real God should not be just in Hebrew or Egyptian or Chinese or English or Russian or Swahili, but in all of them. And the only sound that's in every human language is just breathing. And the second thing I thought was, Wasco, it's not just human languages. Every living being on this planet breathes, and not just in a bubble alone, but we breathe each other. The plants, the vegetation, and the animals breathe each other. CO2 and oxygen, we breathe back and forth. That's what keeps life on this planet alive. And that's what the danger is of what we call the climate crisis. It's really a crisis in that breathing name of God. And that depth is a deep understanding of how all life is interwoven, interconnected by the breath of life, the deepest name of God. All the names are sacred and
6 minutes.
depend on the sacredness of breath. The second thing I want to say is that all the Jewish festivals are, you might say, the offspring of a love affair between the Jewish people and the earth. They're all the results of the seasons of the year, and they all celebrate different aspects of the seasons of the year. And the third thing is the policy which grew up in the biblical tradition of how human beings should treat the earth. And that tradition was that we could make the earth do what we wanted for 6 years. But in the 7th year, the earth got to rest. We didn't give orders to the earth. The earth rested. Organized agriculture ended. The fences were torn down. Human beings shared what grew just of its own volition, and animals wandered and ate what was there for the earth. And what's more, that year was a way of saying, we're not interested in economic growth. What we're interested in is a pulsating economy, which grows and then pauses, and grows and then pauses.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, that was the heart of it anyway.
Okay, good. Well, there'll be time for questions and answers, so we'll come back to you. So we'll take a moment now, Will, if you can post the responses to, or the second questions. Okay, those are the results. What we want to see are the new questions. Do you accept the existing science related to climate change? Do you accept it? Yes, no, or somewhat. Do you consider some poverty and crime to be a result of climate change? Yes, no, or somewhat. Are you yourself, or do you know climate refugees? Examples: Californians relocating due to reoccurring fires, Southerners relocating due to reoccurring floods and hurricanes, Midwesterners leaving failing farms, or others. So if you would answer and submit, we'll take a look in just a moment. Our next speaker this evening, we are very grateful to welcome the Very Reverend Robert Stokig, Vicar General of the Diocese of Las Vegas, who will be representing the Catholic perspective. Father Bob is a Catholic priest in the Diocese of Las Vegas. In addition to serving as Vicar General of the diocese, he is also rector of Guardian Angel Cathedral. Father Bob holds degrees in theology and music and is a longtime friend of the Interfaith Council of Southern Nevada.
Thanks, Alita. Great to be with you all. I was asked specifically to talk about Laudato Si, which is Pope Francis's document from about 5.5 years ago on the care for our common home. And Laudato Si is actually from St. Francis of Assisi's Canticle of Creation, also known as the Canticle of the Sun. Laudato Si, mi Signore, praise be to you, my Lord. It, in case you don't have current brush up on your Umbrian medieval Italian, that's how it translates. And the Catholic Church documents are named based on their first words. I'm going to first do a quick summary of the themes in the document. It's not a document just on climate change, but it also addresses people and social issues, consumerism and poverty, and the mistreatment of all creation. And its specific themes have to do with the intimate relationship between the poor and the fragility of the planet, the conviction that everything in the world is connected, the critique of new paradigms and new forms of power derived from technology, specifically about the haves and the have-nots in terms of access. It talks about the call to seek other ways of understanding the economy and progress, the value proper to each creature, the human meaning of ecology, the need for forthright and honest debate, the serious responsibility of international and local policy, and the throwaway culture, and the proposal of a new way to look at lifestyle. It is available in about 15 languages on the Vatican website. And if you simply Google Laudato Si, you'll probably get this link, but you could do a screenshot. This would take you to the English translation of the document. And it's a document that is interesting in several aspects. It comes on the heels of other popes. So Francis is not the only pope to have ever talked about ecology or to have moved things. Benedict XVI really, with boots on the ground, put solar panels all over the Vatican and not only spoke about that need for climate care, but also acted on it. John Paul II called for global ecological conversion, and way back in 1970, Pope Paul VI addressed it. So it's a document of about 40,000 words, which means it's about 25% longer than Shakespeare's Hamlet. It's got 246 numbered paragraphs, and it's divided into an introduction and 6 chapters. And this word cloud just simply represents the recurring words within the document. The larger the word in a word cloud, of course, the more frequently the word occurs. It is a papal encyclical, which means it's a letter, and it's a form of teaching within our church, and it's addressed to everyone in the world. It begins by outlining how our common home is in crisis, that we have this shared inheritance, but we have this responsibility to future generations, and we stand in that liminal space, grateful for what has been and charged with protecting what will be. It talks about the unprecedented pollution and waste, about climate change, about water, about biodiversity and its loss in our current agricultural practices. It talks about society and how particularly the poor are suffering. Quality of life is interrupted and the breakdown of society, partly through the good and the bad of media and technology. The first chapter is about God and creation. It builds very much on what Rabbi talked about in that biblical sense. And it also touches on St. Francis's mystical theology. Though Francis wasn't the first pope to talk about this, He's the one who's given the longest teaching on it. He says creation is God's loving plan. It is holy. God alone owns the world, and that we have to remember we are not God. We are called to be caretakers, not dominators. And it talks about the relationship between people and other creatures, realizing that all creatures have value, and then defines this sin relationship, because God, in our Catholic expression, is Trinitarian. God's own essence is relational. God made us, and those broken relationships are how sin happens. So we're called to be in right relationship with God, in right relationship inside ourselves, in right relationship with each other, and in right relationship with God's own creation. It talks about Christian hope and how faith offers a partial way out of this mess and encourages us to do it with God's help. And the causes of the crisis, Francis, I'll go over this rather quickly because they are not unique to his writing, but this piece on technology is probably one of the things that he contributes, that because we can do something doesn't mean we necessarily should do it, that technology itself changes us, and that we have to start to ask questions about progress. Is more always better? Is technology and the economy our savior? Which leads us to learning that we're self-centered. We think we learn to live without limits. We ignore consequences. There's this extreme compulsive consumerism, and it's driven by convenience and the throwaway culture. The poor and the vulnerable are disproportionately affected, and the importance of the dignity of work is a key part in his writing as well. Talking about nature and future generations. Then the last part of the document charts a partial new vision, looking at ecological and social situations and trying to make the case that you can't separate social and ecological situations, that it's all part of a big piece connected together. Talks about the common good as the heart of everything we ought to be involved with, that we can't trust business and economy and politics. We need a moral grounding, that all of those things can contribute, but they're often focused on short-term goals. The global priorities he sets out to phase out fossil fuels, protect biodiversity, and address social issues. And this need for healthy dialogue, which is a great thing this forum itself does. And what can I do is the question. It calls for an ecological conversion of heart and a commitment to action. And this dual need to see and appreciate beauty and evoke gratitude toward the divine creator, to look at our lifestyle and try to learn that less is more, and to develop new habits, to learn that little actions can make a difference, and to consider the impact of finding a better way to live, to limit what we want, to limit what we consume, and limit what we do. And that was a whirlwind tour of a 40,000 word document.
Bravo. That was wonderful. Thank you, Father Bob. I think we are now able to take a look at the results of our second set of questions. So, do you accept the existing science related to climate change? Yes, 85%, no, 3%. 12% say somewhat. Do you consider some poverty and crime to be a result of climate change? 70% say yes, 13% say no, 17% say somewhat. And are you yourself or do you know climate refugees? 48% say yes, and 52% say no. Well, that's getting pretty close to home now, that we have at least half of us who know climate refugees or are one ourselves. Our last speaker this evening is Mr. Jason Bracken, who is a geological and environmental scientist. And he will be representing an atheist, secular, humanistic perspective. Jason is a Ph.D. candidate in ecology, evolution, and environmental biology at Miami University. He is working on models that help understand and manage species of interest and conservation importance. He's very active in his community as a city council member for Oxford, Ohio, and a member of several of its committees, including the Advisory Environmental Committee and the Climate Action Steering Committee. We're very pleased to have you with us tonight, Jason. It's yours.
Thank you. A little bit of an echo there, but hopefully that goes away. Because secularism has diverse origins individually and historically, and a varied set of associated beliefs, I'm going to talk more about my personal beliefs and philosophies, but they're shared by many. So some relevant titles that I would ascribe to myself would be atheist, naturalist, and secular humanist. So by atheist, I mean that I don't believe in a God, and there's many types of atheists. I would consider myself an agnostic atheist, which means I don't claim to positively know that there is no God, but I happen to see no sufficient evidence for it. And I don't necessarily see a reason to think there should be a God. As a naturalist, that means that I don't believe in anything supernatural, that I don't believe in something categorically distinct from what we have come to know collectively in the natural world. There's certainly plenty more that we need to know that we do not understand, but I don't necessarily think that that leaves the realm of what I would consider the natural. As a humanist, it means I basically have concern for the well-being, value, and agency of human beings. But I personally, and many humanists as well, would extend that to mean value for living things outside of human beings. Personally, I would consider anything with the capacity to suffer, whether that means experience physical pain, emotional pain, intellectual pain. I feel I have some obligation to try and reduce that suffering and defend their existence. And I do not want to be a speciesist, for those who are followers of philosopher Peter Singer might note. I want to care about all things that have the capacity to suffer. And this relates directly to why I have these moral obligations. They come from a couple different places and philosophies. And the first is simply empathy. I know what it means to suffer. I have suffered. I know what it means to experience joy. I've experienced joy. And my natural inclination is to not wish suffering upon others and to wish them a pleasant existence of their own choosing. And I find empathy to be a beautiful thing in itself. And it's something I want to cultivate in myself, and it's something I want to see more in the world and in myself. And so in that sort of sense, you can kind of consider it an aesthetic value. Or for those who follow virtue ethics, it might be one of the virtues that I live by. But this is sort of subjective. And the other big reason is a little bit more objective and about sort of fairness and justice. And that comes in the sense of reciprocity. You know, this idea that I think it's unjust to ask of others what I would not ask of myself. Meaning I can't ask of others to give me freedom, to provide me help when I need it, to have concern for my value and welfare, if I'm not going to also ask myself to have those same concerns and duties towards others. That would be inherently unfair to me. And as I would most need help when I'm vulnerable, I seek to help those who are most vulnerable first. And I also extend this towards not just, you know, me now in the current present, but for all people across generations. And what's interesting is these values that I'm talking about are things that show up in many different faiths. You know, essentially this is the golden rule. The idea of caring about generations in front of you is something that's present in a lot of faiths, especially Native American faiths. And so we share a lot there. And another reason is sort of a selfish one, and that's that I appreciate our natural world and the humans and wildlife that live in it. You know, I find them fascinating and beautiful, and I do not want to lose them. And what this all means in terms of climate change is that I feel I have an obligation not to induce suffering in living creatures around the world, nor to participate in the wanton destruction of individuals, species, or ecosystems, and to actively try to reduce this suffering to protect the Earth's inhabitants from the harms that myself and others may have or might otherwise contribute to. And we have very good evidence that climate change will be, and currently is, contributing to the Earth's 6th major extinction event, meaning massive loss of species and the ecosystems that they simultaneously create and need themselves to live, well beyond the natural rate of decline in the absence of human presence. This is something we are causing, and we have very good evidence of that. And I feel we have an obligation to stop it. As well, we know that climate change is affecting human existence through the loss of this life and ecosystems that I just referred to, but also even more directly through destructive weather and resource depletion in the forms of drought, famine, natural disasters, inequality, and violent global conflict that may result from these other issues. We are increasing sea level and increasing the chances of coastal and island flooding. We are very likely increasing the number and severity of violent storms, as well as droughts and wildfires. And this is something, these two things seem opposed to each other, but that actually makes sense because we're basically violently disrupting all these different global cycles, both weather cycles and circulation patterns. And so you get all these different effects. In fact, a lot of the harms come from the idea that things are just going to be very different than the way they were before, that the animals, wildlife, and ecosystems have adapted to some way of life, and we are rapidly, rapidly changing it much faster than would happen on its own. And so we have lots of destruction from this, and we also have sea level rise, increased chance of coastal and island flooding, as mentioned. We're melting glaciers and polar caps. We're changing the ocean temperatures, which is devastating for a number of creatures and forces them to move in places they wouldn't otherwise exist. It interrupts nutrient cycling. It increases acidification and oxygen levels.
6 minutes.
And this is something that is not just a biologist, speaking to you, but, many of our intelligence agencies and our military apparatus have done studies that show that, climate change is likely to be a major contributor to future conflict. And indeed, right now, we have many conflicts around the world that have had ties to the effects of climate change. It's a conflict multiplier. And because of all these things, I have an obligation to reduce my effect and the effect of others on making the climate worse and the harm it would do to our planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason. We really appreciate your comments. And we also want to say hello to all of our Facebook viewers who are out there. We're so glad that you're with us. I'd like to start our question and answer period with a question to all of our panelists. And we're going to start with Elder Merkulieff. And if everyone, this is a question answer for everyone, a question for everyone. And if you can keep your answers to a minute, even though the question appears to be long. It seems that one of the things that has to be achieved before humanity can deal with climate change is the recognition that we are a single global community. Would you agree? And if so, how far off do you see this recognition happening? And who should lead the way on this? Religion, government, people, or a catastrophe? So, Elder Merkulieff?
Very good question. When I say on one, this is what our people know. We don't believe anything. We don't, because belief is a borrowed concept from somebody else. But we only know what we know ourselves. And so what we know is that we are our other selves. We are all one, not many. And it's an illusion to think that we are many. Now, as the Rabbi said, when you breathe, this is the connection to the divine, and we get it through our hearts. And we know that the divine exists. We don't question it. We have a form of faith that is beyond what most people understand. And that is faith that is in every cell of the body, not in the mind and only in the mind. Faith that says, be present in the moment and in the heart. The rest will be taken care of.
Thank you very much. Then we will move to Rabbi. Same question. Would you like me to read it again, or do you have it? You're on mute.
I think it's a combination of catastrophe and faith. I think the virus has begun to teach us that we are one. And I think it could teach us only that we have to hunker down in our own bunkers and be enemies of each other, so that I think our faiths need to teach us what we just heard, that we breathe together and that we cannot survive unless we know that we breathe together. The hunkering down will only kill us. So that both are necessary. Unfortunately, both are necessary for us to learn the truth that we are one. And it is also true that the differences are truth. Ecology is based on the notion that each species is different from the others. That is what we fit together. One of my grandchildren taught me when she was 8 years old. We are like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. It is our differences that make it possible for us to fit together. That's what makes us in the image of God, that our differences are what unite us to make us one, just like a jigsaw puzzle. And we need our faiths to teach that. All of them should be teaching that. And unfortunately, it is when catastrophes happen that we open ourselves to learn that truth.
Thank you very much. I'll read the question again, Father Bob, just so everybody is on the same page. It seems that one of the things that has to be achieved before humanity can deal with climate change is the recognition that we are a single global community. Would you agree? And if so, how far off do you see this recognition as happening? Who needs to lead the way? Religion, government, the people, or a catastrophe?
Yeah, I think the disappearance of understanding a global community and our interdependence with each other also coincides with our pulling back from really being people who live on the land. So many people in urban areas have no understanding of how the moisture and the growing of crops works. We just go to food stores to buy them. And that coincides simultaneously with this sort of globalism in terms of production. And in terms of that, the disproportionate use of minerals from developing countries with little benefit to them, but great benefit to the businesses that extract them. And then us as consumers relying on these elements within the manufactured products that we buy. So I do think religion plays a role in helping to form conscience, and that conscience, whether it comes out of a religious sense or an ethical sense or out of a planetary sense, is the key to being able to move forward. But I think part of what maybe faith can teach us is how to be more contemplative in the midst of these things, so that we do first realize how vulnerable life is. I think that's one of the things that COVID-19 has taught us, perhaps, is that we're not as invincible as we think we are. We're all afraid of something we can't see, a tiny virus. And that ought to link us more clearly with each other naturally. But I think that government and society and religion can all play a pivotal role in helping to steer that direction.
Thank you. Jason, your turn.
Yes, so all the things you mentioned, I think, can and do play a role in that. But I think it's not so much any of those individually, but what they do, right? And so I would go back to empathy, as I mentioned in my talk, that we need to build empathy. We need to have more interaction, more connections, and representation so others can feel what others feel as themselves. And the history of the modern world is an ongoing expansion of our moral circles, to increase our concern, from starting from ourselves to our family, to the community, to the state, to the nation, to the world, and people within it, right? To groups of people that you wouldn't immediately identify with, right? People of different races, ethnicities, colors, sex, all these different things that would normally make it hard to connect with. Our history has been expanding our civil rights and concern and welfare for others. We've taken some major steps back, including recently, but that's the direction we've been going, and I hope we continue to get there. And I think it's by building empathy in different ways.
Thank you, Jason. Dr. Kant, your turn.
I do agree with the basic premise of the question. Yes, I think we do need to realize that we are a single global community. How far off is this? I like to be an optimist. I think it's happening now. I think it is because of the internet, and we have communication globally, almost instantaneous communication. So we know what's going on in different parts of the world. The question was, who should take the lead? Religion, government, people, or a catastrophe? I think religion, government, and the people need to take the lead. I hope it won't be a catastrophe, but I wonder if this virus is the catastrophe that we're dealing from. I tend to think the virus is nature's warning that we need to pay attention to what is going on. I do think that we will see and are seeing a mass movement in this direction, and I believe it is the younger generation that is leading this movement. And I look at the work of Greta Thunberg, the young woman from Sweden, and I'm so impressed at what she has been able to do. And I truly think that it is the young people who are going to really lead us in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Candace. Now, we're going to start taking questions for individuals, and we'll begin with Rabbi Waskow for a question directed just to him. In your opinion, what is the key requirement to achieving a sustainable society? What does a sustainable society look like? Can you paint a picture of the contrasts?
I go back to that seventh year, which in Hebrew was called Shemitah, the year of release, releasing the earth from being exploited, releasing other human beings from being exploited. It was the year in which debts were annulled, as well as the year in which the earth was not forced to produce. I don't think that exactly what was done 3,000 years ago was what we need to do, but Midrash, that is the reinterpretation of an ancient text, is the way in which Judaism has lived, and I think the way in which all our great traditions live, by reinterpreting. Now it's the whole planet, not a little sliver of land on the eastern shore of the Mediterranean Sea, that we need to be doing that. I think the crucial thing is building in a rhythm of release, building in a rhythm of release from the carbon dioxide that we're pouring, so that, as I said, the crisis is not only a crisis of technology of CO2, it's a crisis in God's name, it's a crisis in the breathing of the planet. When the planet can't breathe, it's the truth of what we've seen in the Black Lives Matter movement, where individuals forced by the police that are supposed to protect them to die because they can't breathe. So I think that sense of rhythm of release is what is going to be crucial. The sense that all life is interconnected. And I think we are responsible to teach it. We, the bunch of us who are here on this program, and the peoples we represent are crucial to teaching.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. Our next question is for Father Bob. How is the Catholic Church getting people to believe and act upon the Pope's teaching that ecological sin by action or omission is a sin against God and a sin against future generations?
Well, in multiple ways. The one of them being leading by example. Right now, Catholic Charities of Southern Nevada, for example, is undergoing some renovation, but part of that begins with applying solar panels to the roofs so that it becomes a more sustainable operation. The church tries to teach from a moral point of view, but it tries also to encourage people to be in dialogue with science. You know, Pope Francis himself has a master's degree in biology, has talked about the importance of beginning that dialogue. And I think part of the way the church approaches this is to continue to teach that we're not islands, we're not individuals adrift by ourselves, but we're responsible for each other. So that sense of solidarity and that sense of community is what forms our conscience, and that's how we launch into the world. The church can't necessarily always convince people by rational argument. So it's always over a course of time and integrating those teachings into the regular cycle of the readings from scripture that we hear on Sunday, because there's a lot of biblical text that we can use to underpin the way in which God points us toward that care for our common home. But also then our life as a community ought to give us that experience, that incubation, and how to live that out.
Thank you very much, Father Bob. Jason, the question may not relate to your area of expertise, but if it does, please jump in. Briefly, what is geoengineering and how might it affect climate change?
Yeah, so geoengineering just means any way that technology can be used to sort of, well, basically fix climate change and other issues, sort of through technology. So this might involve something like putting certain particulate in the atmosphere that helps reflect more of the sun's energy coming in out of the atmosphere before it gets absorbed and can't leave because of the greenhouse gases. Sadly, because of the trajectory we're on, we might need something like this to change our course. But some of these, like the one I just mentioned, you know, we've never done something like that or something to that scale that we would, you know, purposefully globally change what's happening in the world through physics. And so some are worried we might cause more harm than good. But these might be technologies we absolutely have to look into, because right now we don't have enough buy-in. You know, not enough of the world is doing what they need to do to change the trajectory to fix things. And so we might need technology to help save us, which also involves us putting up enough money to invest in these technologies and voting for politicians that look into these. But it's something we have to be very careful about. And there's many different technologies that we're currently looking into to try and change that direction, if that answers the question.
I think that answers the question. Thank you very much. This question is for Dr. Kant. How did the rejection of the ancient idea of the power of the feminine contribute to the current climate crisis?
I just have to laugh because I think that is such a wonderful question that somebody put in there. Yes, the ancient perception of the feminine, the perception of the earth as mother and the sacred as female, did encourage people to live in harmony with nature, to venerate nature, to hold nature and Mother Earth sacred. When we lost that, when we lose the feminine, we lose that connection with the earth, our mother. And instead, we look at, we are distant somehow from the material world, the physical world that surrounds us. And I hope that kind of addresses that. I teach an entire class on it, and I could talk about that for 16 weeks if you'd like me to.
Okay, well, that was a good intro. Thank you very much. And then for Elder Merculius, the flip side, how has a patriarchal, male-oriented society influenced the current climate change situation?
Thank you. Great question. From our perspective, there's been a pendulum that's swung back and forth between masculine imbalance and feminine imbalance. And the last swing of the pendulum, according to our stories, is about 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. And it's the masculine imbalance, that one is without the other. And so we are still in this masculine imbalance. And it's showing up in everything that is around us in what we're trying to do. I mean, when there are good people of good heart that are focused on stopping these various things like the refugees issues, the violation of women and political corruption, wars, all of these things, the elders are saying, you know, we are energy beings. We have mental, physical, and spiritual energy. And when we put this energy into stopping something, the energy goes into that which we want to stop, and it becomes bigger. And that instead, we need to focus on that which we want to see, not in reaction to anything else. And so the masculine imbalance is according to the elders that I know around the world, are saying that everything that we're witnessing now in the world that is dysfunctional, that is out of harmony with life, is created by this masculine imbalance. And so the women need to take the lead during this time to bring us back into dead center. The elders are saying that we have a chance of putting this pendulum swing into dead center, but it's going to take the leadership of women.
Thank you very much. Father Bob, this next question is for you. What are the habits that are most destructive in the United States when it comes to the sin of polluting and destroying the environment?
Well, certainly that throwaway society in which we live. I mean, even it's interesting when we think about our response to the pandemic, the necessary PPE and things that we use to protect ourselves and each other. There's no way to recycle most of those materials, and then we've driven ourselves away from using our own cloth shopping bags to the store's plastic ones to protect the store employees. It's that whole consumer focus, I think, that is part of the big destructive effort that we really have to work against, because things become an end in themselves instead of part of that bigger story of how do they serve the common good. And I think learning those lessons about sustainability and about how we manage and how we also learn to live with just what we need instead of all the things we're taught to want by consumer culture. I think that's the biggest destructive part in our society right now that we have to work against.
Thank you very much.
Lita, I wonder if I might come in here. I've been kicking myself because I think that I didn't really say what I want to say about the first question. What I think would be the most effective single thing we could do would be to take it as a religious obligation for congregations, not just individuals, congregations, to create solar energy co-ops, that we as collective groups take it as religious groupings to not only save money and change the technology, but to do it together, celebratory co-ops that see what we are doing as political and celebratory, so that we take joy in shifting the technology at the local level, so that we can look each other in the face and say, we are celebrating, we are dancing to deal with the earthquake because we know it celebrates the earth to do it. And that's practical and profound at the same time.
Thank you, Rabbi. The next question is for Jason, and it is, you are working on models that help understand and manage species of conservation importance. Of all the living things on the planet, what made you decide to study amphibians and reptiles?
Yes, I found them fascinating as a child. I played in the creeks, and those are ones I took to. But the truth is that I really appreciate all wildlife. They're all interesting and fascinating. They all have something unique about them. There's no end to how much I could talk about, not just the species that I'm currently focused on, but all sorts of other ones. So, but that one just sort of naturally arose from my childhood and what I ended up playing with most and getting most intrigued by.
Okay, thank you very much. Candace, question for you is, and again, people get to ask questions that are not necessarily always, I'm not exactly sure what the word is, but you'll get my drift. A recent article in the Federalist called Climate Worship Rebranded Paganism. How do you respond to that idea?
Well, I really wish I'd read the article. It sounds fascinating. Climate worship, say the title again.
Well, the question is, a recent article in the Federalist called Climate Worship, let me start over. A recent article in the Federalist called Climate Worship Rebranded Paganism. How do you respond to that?
With a little bit of puzzlement, but not having read the article, I'd like to know what they said about it. It'd be very, very interesting to find out. Definitely, pagans do celebrate the earth, the natural world, as sacred, and feel that we can encounter the sacred there. We can connect with the sacred there. And we do that through the Wheel of the Year, through our celebrations, which celebrate the stations of the sun, the cycles of the moon, and the seasons of the earth. So I'm not sure that I can add much more than that.
Okay, well, that sounds pretty good. Thank you very much. And the next question is for Elder Merkulif. I understand you use the term drop to your heart. What does it mean to drop into your heart?
It's probably the most important thing that is incumbent upon us as human beings to do today. The heart is the only place that is in connection with the divine, and it tells us exactly what we need to know, not the things in the mind that floats around in every direction because ego wants to survive. It's something that is present in the moment and when you're in your heart. That means that we have to get rid of all the human clutter that we have put in our minds. Now, we are so fascinated with knowledge that we've forgotten that knowledge without wisdom is useless and maybe even dangerous. And in this case, it is. And so we need to process and deal with the effects of human trauma in the mind before we can access what the heart is telling us to do. And each one of us has a unique gift to give to the world. And the only way that you can give it to the world is if you access your heart. So the most unselfish thing that you can do is to heal yourself. And we've got an urgency behind that.
Thank you very much. And Rabbi, for you, how did we go from the idea that the Creator gave us the earth to steward, to take care of, to the idea that God gave us the earth to use as we please?
First of all, I don't think either steward or dominate is sufficient. We're part of the earth. If we treat it nicely, that's what stewards think they're doing. But we're part of it, and if we treat it nicely, we gain. If we treat it nastily, we lose. But the point is that we can't stand outside it, either to dominate it or to steward it. We are within it, as well as having power over it. And that's the new understanding. We are simply part of the great ecosystem. And that's beyond both the stewardship. I once was speaking about Torah as the root of my way of thinking. And somebody who was, I guess, hostile to that said, well, what do you do about the line in Torah that says, be fruitful, multiply, fill up the earth, and subdue it? And I said, done. Now what? And everybody in the audience cheered. And now what is the important question? I think the Song of Songs, which is not about dominating the earth, it's about loving the earth, and it's about being loved by the earth. It's the most precious element of the next Torah, of the next wisdom of the Bible. What do we do now? We have filled up the earth. We have multiplied, and we've filled it up, and we've learned to dominate it. We don't need to destroy it to prove that we can destroy it. We know we can. So what do we do now? We love it, and we learn to love it. And that's what the Song of Songs is about. It's about the Garden of Eden for a grown-up human race. That's what the Song of Songs is. And we need to learn it and teach it.
Thank you very much. We have a last round of questions, and if everybody sticks to about a minute, we'll end just about right on time. And we'll start with Jason, and you can either answer the question or make a closing comment. And the question is, I've heard that each average American today, at their current rate of consumption, will be the cause of the severe suffering or death of at least 2 people in the future. Could you please comment on this estimate?
Actually, I have not heard that estimate, but it certainly seems plausible, but something very hard to calculate. But I can give you other information, right? So we know multiple military agencies and intelligence agencies have suggested there will be increased conflict, that climate change is at the very least a conflict multiplier, if not a conflict starter. You know, when you have droughts that, you know, lead to resource depletion and then famine and people need to eat, that leads to conflict. And we know that multiple banking groups have suggested that the cost of climate change is in the billions to trillions, depending on which studies and what time period you look over. This is going to cost us in many ways, and there is no chance that it will not involve human life. There's no chance that it hasn't already taken human lives in terms of increased flooding, major storms. These things are always hard to calculate because these are natural events, but we know how a lot of them work. You know, if we're talking about something like hurricanes, we know that they're fueled by warm temperatures in the ocean, and we know that we're increasing the temperatures. And so even though these threats always exist, there's always an increased statistical probability that they will happen, and they will be worse because of the conditions we are creating. So while I can't say exactly how many additional lives we will take, I can tell you the Americans are huge contributors to this problem, if not the biggest contributors, and we have a big obligation to fix it. And the things that we already done and the things we'll continue to do if we don't fix it will cost many, many human lives.
Thank you, Jason. So the question goes to you, Dr. Kant. Would you like to address that observation or make a comment, a closing comment?
I think I'd just like to make a closing comment if I can.
Sure.
I find a very useful guide for myself is something called 9 Touchstones. And it goes like this. In terms of your life, nurture life, walk in love and beauty, trust the knowledge that comes through the body, speak the truth about conflict, pain, and suffering, take only what you need, think about the consequences of your actions for 7 generations, approach the taking of life with great restraint, practice great generosity, and repair the web. Blessed be.
Amen.
Thank you very much, Candace. Elder Merkuliev, would you like to address the statement or the estimation of lives lost by American consumption, or make a closing comment?
All these questions are questions that are below the threshold question that we need to be asking. And the way that Indigenous elders from around the world are assessing this time is that we must become love, not think love, not do love, even though that's important. It's not half as important as you becoming love in every cell of your body. Those that do this will be able to determine what they need to do in the world on the outside as a second level. But first you have to become love. And that's all I have to say.
That's pretty big. Thank you. Rabbi, would you like to make a closing comment or talk or address that estimate?
We've already heard it addressed well enough. What I'd like to say is simply, blessed be the breath of life. Be conscious that every word we speak is possible by the breath of life, that we take the breath in through every grass, every tree, that we share it with every turtle, every crab, every lion, every living being on the planet, that without them we could not live, that in every prayer group, in every work group, they are present, all of them are present, that without them no group of human beings could exist, and that we need to act as if that's true, because it is true.
Thank you, Rabbi. Father Bob, you get the last word.
I think following up on what Rabbi just said, not to act is a choice itself. And that's the choice, that's the thing that we have to keep ourselves from doing individually, community, culture. To not act is to risk irreparable harm. It could never be calculated how many lives will be lost. However, we have an impact. It can be a negative impact if we don't act. It can be a positive impact if we act, and if we act together in love and in that sense of the common good. So I think the overriding theme across every speaker tonight has been that imperative to take into account more than just ourselves, more than just our egos, to realize that the breath we breathe is the breath of creation, and to choose to enter into that as an act of love.
Amen.
Thank you, Father Bob. And thank you all of our wonderful panelists for your beautiful, excellent, brilliant discussion this evening. We thank you. We thank everyone who tuned in on Facebook and Zoom and other ways. And I hope that you'll be able to fill out the evaluation that you will see when you exit the screen. But again, it's hard to say thank you enough to these wonderful individuals who have shared their time and their expertise and their love and wisdom with us tonight.